appears completely ordinary, even charming, someone you would never suspect. But behind closed doors, he's hiding something so dark, so unimaginable, that it will send chills down your spine. How could anyone like him hide in plain sight for years, committing unthinkable acts? Jeffrey Dahmer, a name that still echoes through history as one of the most chilling figures the world has ever known. A man who lured victims from the streets, taking their lives with terrifying precision. But how did he get away with it for so long? How could he walk among us, unnoticed, for over a decade? How could someone so ordinary become so monstrous? Dahmer didn't look like a killer. But behind his quiet demeanor and innocent appearance, a twisted obsession festered, one that would lead him down a path of unspeakable horrors. What turned him into the monster he became? Why do some criminals blend in so well, hiding their true nature from the world? What signs did Dahmer leave behind that went unnoticed? What drove him to commit such atrocities? And most chillingly, could it happen again? Before we dive deep into the twisted story of Jeffrey Dahmer, we want to hear from you. What do you think made him into the man he became? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. By doing so, you'll help us bring you even more mind-bending stories from the depths of human darkness. Stay tuned, what comes next might just change everything you thought you knew about the human mind. From the standpoint of criminology, the case of Jeffrey Dahmer represents a disturbing intersection of psychological pathology and societal oversight. His story is not one of a single violent outburst, but rather the unfolding of a deeply entrenched psychological obsession that evolved over time, resulting in a series of grotesque acts. Dahmer's actions reveal important truths about the darker recesses of the human psyche, the consequences of untreated mental illness, and the social and institutional failures that allowed him to continue his spree for over a decade. Dahmer's early years offer critical insight into the formation of his later behaviors. Raised in a seemingly average family, Dahmer's life was marked by early signs of social isolation, a lack of emotional connection with his parents, and an increasing desire for control. These traits are not necessarily abnormal in isolation, but in the context of Dahmer's eventual crimes, they paint a chilling portrait of a mind already beginning to spiral. His teenage years were characterized by a profound sense of detachment. This emotional disconnection was accompanied by the early development of morbid fantasies, which, when left unchecked, evolved into a full-fledged obsession with dominance and control over others. At this point, Dahmer had not yet acted upon his desires, but the foundation for his later crimes was being laid. Psychologists and criminologists have long understood the link between social isolation and deviant behavior. Dahmer's detachment from his family, combined with his inability to form healthy social relationships, created an environment ripe for the development of violent fantasies. Research indicates that isolation can distort one's perception of reality, making it easier for unhealthy thoughts and impulses to take root and flourish. Dahmer's lack of meaningful connections played a critical role in shaping his eventual violent tendencies. By the time Dahmer reached adulthood, his fantasies had intensified. What started as a mere curiosity about control and possession evolved into an obsessive compulsion. Dahmer, in his own words, began to see his victims as objects, tools to fulfill his desires. This shift in perception is significant, as it speaks to a fundamental change in Dahmer's relationship with humanity. He no longer saw people as living, breathing individuals but as mere means to an end. The dismemberment of his victims, combined with the preservation of body parts, was not just a method of covering his tracks. It was a symbolic act of dominance, a manifestation of his need to assert control over his victims, even after death. This reflects the growing extent of Dahmer's dehumanization, where his violent impulses were no longer confined to fleeting fantasies but had become permanent, physical acts of destruction. Dehumanization is a key concept in criminology. It refers to the process by which individuals begin to view others as less than human, making it easier to engage in harmful behavior toward them. Dahmer's view of his victims as objects to be controlled and possessed is a prime example of dehumanization. His ability to view his victims in this way allowed him to commit acts that would be unimaginable for most people. Obsession played a crucial role in Dahmer's crimes. His desire for control and permanence over his victims was so overwhelming that it drove him to extremes. Unlike many serial killers, Dahmer did not act out of anger or hatred. His motives were far more complex: the desire to possess his victims, to keep them with him forever. This obsession led him to experiment with methods to keep his victims alive in a zombified state, using chemicals in an attempt to induce a catatonic state in them. This reveals the depth of Dahmer's need for control. Dahmer's compulsive behavior reflects what criminologists call the cycle of violence, a pattern where the offender's desire for power or control leads them to engage in increasingly extreme behavior. The cycle escalates until it can no longer be contained, and the criminal's actions reach a breaking point. In Dahmer's case, this breaking point was his eventual capture. The cycle of violence can often be traced in serial offenders. What starts as a mild impulse or fantasy gradually intensifies until the need to act becomes overwhelming. Dahmer's attempts to preserve his victims, to keep them alive in a zombie-like state, were manifestations of this compulsion. His behavior became increasingly bizarre, as his obsession with controlling others grew. From a psychological standpoint, Dahmer's case offers significant insight into the mind of a serial killer. While many serial offenders act out of a desire for revenge or hatred, Dahmer's motivations were rooted in his need for power and control. His ability to manipulate others, his meticulous planning, and his ability to blend in with society for so long all point to a highly intelligent and calculated individual. Yet, despite his outward appearance, Dahmer's actions were driven by deep internal conflicts that he could not resolve. Psychiatrists have often noted that serial killers tend to possess certain traits: a lack of empathy, a need for control, and a tendency to view others as objects. Dahmer exhibited all of these characteristics, making his psychological profile one of the most chilling in criminal history. Serial killers often possess a unique ability to manipulate their surroundings. Dahmer's ability to deceive police officers, convince them that a 14-year-old victim was his lover, and evade suspicion for so long speaks to his manipulative nature. This manipulation is a key factor in the ability of serial killers to continue their crimes unchecked. A critical aspect of Dahmer's case is the failure of both society and law enforcement to recognize the warning signs. Despite multiple encounters with the police and several neighbors noticing strange behavior, Dahmer was able to continue his crimes for years. This represents a profound failure in the system, a failure to act on the red flags that were present. The question that remains is, how many more could have been saved had the authorities acted sooner? Dahmer's case demonstrates the critical need for better training in recognizing signs of deviant behavior and a more proactive approach in dealing with individuals exhibiting early warning signs of dangerous tendencies. It also serves as a reminder that the pursuit of justice must always be diligent, and no warning sign should be ignored. The failure to intervene in Dahmer's case highlights a broader issue within society: the tendency to ignore the warning signs of potential danger. Dahmer's ability to manipulate those around him, combined with the failure of institutions to act on the information at hand, contributed to the escalation of his crimes. It's not just one of brutality and terror. It is a reminder of how the darkest corners of the human mind can hide in plain sight, masked by is just